Next level. Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is a call to order of the Aspen City Council special meeting for April 4th, 2023. Could we have a roll call for attendance, please?
Councillor Doyle.
Here.
Councillor Howenstein.
Present.
Councillor Mesereau. Councillor Richards. Mayor Tory.
And I'm here as well. We have a special meeting scheduled this evening for approval or consideration, I should say, of resolution number 54. This is appointing Kimberly Ferber as police chief. As this is an action item, gentlemen, we are open for a motion at this time or discussion.
Well, I'll open for discussion by moving to approve Resolution 54, Series 2023.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. So further discussion?
I think we're really fortunate. We had a really strong pool of candidates, and Kim rose to the top. I'm very happy to welcome her.
Thanks, Ward.
I'll agree with what Ward said. Pleased to welcome you to the city of Aspen.
Thanks, John. My apologies for council members that couldn't be here today. But I just want to say a few words. I was going to save most of this for actual swearing in, which will be sometime in the future. But I just want to say that we have an incredible team for our APD. We believe that we are making our team and our team members stronger with the addition of Kim Ferber. I want to welcome you to the Aspen community as well. For the public that is watching, a little background. I just wanted to remind people that the city APD's former chief, Richard Pryor, retired in December of 2022. The city enlisted a professional recruiter, conducted a nationwide search. 44 individuals were applying for the position. We had that narrowed down to 5 finalists. Through many different community meet and greets, panel discussions, interviews with the city manager, city attorney, HR, and the like. This was a long process, and many of you that are in the room participated in that. We want to say thank you to all of you. With that being said, I will acknowledge again that this is a move to make our team even stronger and our team members even stronger. So again, welcome to you. We have a motion and a second. Could we have a roll call for a vote on resolution number 54, please?
Councillor Doyle.
Yes.
Councillor Howenstein.
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
I'm a yes. That could have a round of applause.
Join us at the table. Join us at the table. So step one's always to make sure the green light's on in here. On your mics. Can you tell? I can't tell with the sun. Great.
Yes.
And so maybe if you just want to share a few words about yourself, I'd love if you'd introduce some of the folks who came from Sterling to support you today too, if you have the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. Wow, I'm really humbled. Thank you all for coming today. With me is my partner, Kim, and then my current boss, Chief Tyson Kerr. Thank you, Chief, for coming and supporting me. I'm really overwhelmed right now, and I feel honored to be your next Chief of Police. So thank you all for coming and showing your support.
We're really proud of the department. I've gotten to know the department even closer over the last years. We knew that this transition was coming. So thank you, Council, for your support of the process, for your involvement in many steps of the process with really important community input along the way. I would be remiss if I didn't mention folks like Catherine Sand, Crystal Logan, Sheriff Buglione, all who helped us along the way. And Buglione, sorry. Everyone tells me the G is something different. They were all key parts of that process, and also the just recently retired police chief of Vail was a critical part of our team too in evaluating candidates. So we certainly, as this process finishes up, we'll be sending our personal appreciation on behalf of our organization to them. We're looking forward to Kim getting here, hitting the ground running, and she, as you can see, has a whole team behind her and continuing the success of Aspen Police Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, that's our agenda this evening. I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote for adjournment?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yay.
Mayor Tory.
And yes. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. right, well, welcome and thank you for joining us. This is the joint meeting between the Pickens County Board of County Commissioners and the Aspen City Council. It is April 4th,
Yep.
2023. Let's see, tonight's agenda, just a few items. Are we starting off with compost? Okay. And Ainsley's here to introduce this item, and we just want to share information at today's meeting.
All right. Good afternoon/evening, Council and Board of County Commissioners. My name is Ainsley Brosnan-Smith, and I am the Waste Diversion and Recycling Program Administrator for the Environmental Health and Sustainability Department for the City of Aspen. And tonight, I am here to talk about Chapter 12.05, the Ordinance Number 4 that was passed on February 28th by City Council, and provide you all an update on what it means and what it does. The agenda for tonight is going to be a brief background, previous council direction, a key elements to Chapter 12.05, organic waste diversion, and next steps now that this has been passed. And to preface tonight's meeting, I have brought Council's carbon goal up on the screen, which was set by Council in 2021 to take meaningful action in reducing Aspen's greenhouse gas emissions. And in part to achieve this, Council also set science-based targets for the different sectors of our greenhouse gas emitting areas, including waste. And within our waste goal, we have an organics reduction goal of 25% by 2025, and 100% by 2050, meaning we want to reduce the amount of organic food waste material headed into the landfill by those percentages by those years. In addition, I have brought on the screen Aspen's 2020 greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and you can see that solid waste was 16% of that inventory, and within solid waste, we have municipal solid waste. And organic material is the single largest item landfilled as a part of our municipal solid waste, so it is a large fraction of things we throw away in the trash. And a part of that, when organic material is landfilled, it goes through a different sort of breaking down process where it becomes starved for oxygen and produces a greenhouse gas called methane, which is a lot more potent than carbon dioxide when it reaches the atmosphere. And additionally, our Aspen Sustainability Action Plan, which was previously known as the CAP, the Climate Action Plan, outlines organic waste diversion as a target for our team to work towards greenhouse gas emissions reductions and savings. In 2022, the Pickens County Solid Waste Center held a waste characterization study that went through the trash to see what we were actually throwing away, and highlighted on the screen are compostable organics, compostable paper, and other organics. And combined, that creates 42.6% of our trash is compostable organic material that could have otherwise been diverted and composted right there at the Solid Waste Center. This has gone up 7% since 2015, so we can say that voluntary participation was not going to get us where we needed to for those goals I previously mentioned of 25% reduction by 2025 and 100% reduction by 2050. The previous council direction that led us to adopting this ordinance was in September of 2022. Council recommended we return with a prohibition on the landfilling of organic material through amendments to Title 12. On February 14th of 2023, this year, council approved on first reading of this ordinance, and then on February 28th of 2023, we had a second reading and council adopted ordinance number 4, chapter 12.05. Before I go into the specifics of this ordinance, I want to talk about our stakeholder engagement. So the year leading up to this ordinance passage, we did in-person visits to all of the restaurants in town where we had a flyer about what this would mean if it was to affect your business and why it's important to divert your organic waste from the landfill stream. We also followed up with emails to all of the restaurant contacts we had on file, held a couple Q&A webinar series for folks to attend and ask us questions, and then we also had a survey for them to respond on why they may not divert their organics from the trash. The top 4 barriers we heard for why they might not divert their organic material from the trash stream was space, wildlife, smell, and cost. For space, that has to do with the footprint inside the restaurant as well as storage outside in the alleyway. And we are working with restaurants to replace some of the trash bins they might have at the end of their cutting blocks with compostable containers. And we have found enough space in the alleyways for the addition of compost containers for all the commercial sector. For wildlife, we do have bear intrusions, and we have suggested in this code, which was adopted, that they must use certified wildlife bear-proof containers, which are those steel containers you might be familiar with, and not the plastic ones. And those are most successful in deterring bears. And then smell, so compost, organic material does break down and have an odor. So adding things like odor neutralizers or increasing frequency of collection to every day a week if needed, or replacing that bin if it's just in disrepair and is just too smelly at that point. Additionally, there are startup costs associated with this ordinance, so the addition of a compost collection service. Our department has allocated funding to help assist with some of these startup costs, and that includes purchasing enough containers to satisfy the entire commercial demand for the city of Aspen. Now going into Chapter 12.05 and what it does. So this is a prohibition on organic material from the landfill. So food waste cannot be thrown away as trash, or compostable materials cannot be thrown away as trash. And alternatively, a sustainable disposal practice is required. So composting or donation for farms, for animal feed, or working with a local food bank to get that prepared meal to a person in need. Additionally, we have required the use of certified wildlife-proof outdoor commercial containers. As I mentioned, those steel containers are now mandatory for all outdoor storage of organic materials in the commercial sector. And our department, Environmental Health and Sustainability, will be the key enforcers behind this code. We are the ones that will be feet in the street, working with restaurants, checking in to see how their organics diversion is going, what practice they have chosen for keeping their organics out of the trash, providing them with signage, and providing them with trainings in both English and in Spanish. What this will look like is in the next 5 years, we have 3 phases. The first phase will take place this year. October 15th, 2023 is the official start date for all businesses with a retail food license. So all restaurants will need to be in compliance starting October 15th. And we started with restaurants because they are the largest generator of organic waste in the city. The next phase is January 15th of 2026, where all commercial businesses and multifamily properties will have to be in compliance. And then finally, January 15th of 2028, everyone within city limits must be in compliance with this code. For next steps, since this was adopted, we are preparing restaurants for the start date of October 15th. We have been conducting walkthroughs of businesses to see what their current practices are like, what materials they're handing out right now, and informing them of this ordinance and preparing them with the right kind of containers they might need. So we are purchasing those collection containers, both for indoor and outdoor, so indoor plastic Slim Jims and outdoor steel containers for those restaurants to use. And then we are also developing an annual reporting structure for the restaurants to report to us on how they are diverting their organics and how it's going. And then finally, as those 2 phases after October 15th come to play, that will be a bit of an obstacle for us as we reach community compliance and education to let, we go from 120 restaurants to working with thousands of individual homeowners and property management companies and commercial businesses. So getting that marketing, advertising out there and awareness around our code will be the final steps after our restaurant outreach. And thank you for having me, and I'm here for any questions.
Great.
Thank you. First of all, I want to congratulate you and the city and city staff for doing this. I think this is fantastic, and I'm really enthusiastic about it and have been eager to see it happen. So it looks very well done, and it's the right time. I had 2 questions. One was, we have a compost container in our dumpster shed in Brush Creek Village, and I noticed that the steel container disintegrates 2 or 3 times as fast as the regular recyclable and trash containers. You're aware of that. Are they plastic lined, or is there something so these things just don't disintegrate so quickly? Is the first question.
It's tough because organics naturally are acidic, so they break down, and they break down that steel. So we're thinking, well, what we've heard from the haulers is that these containers last anywhere from 2 to 3 years. Yeah, so we'll have to look into additional funding if we want to keep replacing these containers. And we suggest that lining the bottom with cardboard or any sort of newspaper helps soak in those juices. But we do not have any sort of plastic lining that the manufacturer inserts into those containers. Okay. I have talked to them about this, and they tell me that they recess it really tightly and try to double wall it, but for right now, there is no alternative solution.
Okay, thank you. It's a tough problem. Just wondering if there was a solution. The next question was just that you've staggered the dates by 2.5 years to the second phase, and then another 2 or 3 to the third phase.
Yeah.
Is that just why?
That was strategic, and we have heard from council that they are interested in the proven success of this program and ramping those dates closer. But for us on our side, with just, it's me and Jimena, who is the other waste specialist. It's just us 2 working with the entire city and getting everyone on board. So we want to make sure we can dedicate our time to all of the people and get them set up for success and not try to overload or just have too much on our plate that we're causing a whole ton of contamination for Kathy up at the landfill. Just making sure we can talk to everyone individually.
Got it, understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ainsley, I wonder if you could look into, there's a spray-on liner that pickup trucks oftentimes have. If you could get a spray-on liner for those dumpsters, that might prolong the life.
Sure. Yeah, I'll look into that. Thank you.
Tori?
Steve, and then Patty?
Mike?
So when I was in the Army many years ago, working on KP, there was a.
The green button.
Okay,
I have no idea.
sorry about that.
I'm on.
Well, there was a light on, not green though. So when I was in the Army, working, in KP, which everybody gets their turn, all of the garbage, the food waste all went into cans, like 55-gallon cans, and a private vendor came around who was collecting all of that and feeding it to hogs, actually, down in Texas. And after it was dumped out, every trash can would be put upside down on a spray thing, which would just
Yeah.
blast water in there real quickly and clean whatever remains were in there out real quickly. So they really didn't smell any. It was just the day's food waste was in each one, and then it was washed out. So I imagine those would last very long and not have the metal corroding and whatnot from being in there for more than one day. So that could be an option to consider, just to have,
Right.
somebody local who could use some or all of it for feeding to hogs or chickens or something, and then
Yeah.
some of it would end up going to the landfill, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's an awesome example. We left the language open in the ordinance so people have the option to donate or work with a farmer instead of just a mandatory, like you can only compost your food scraps. So we're hoping that more people create those relationships with local farmers and get specifically their food scraps, because the farmers can't take like the compostable products.
And I know one business, the Aspen Brewery, was, all of their mash was going to local ranchers to feed the cattle. We fed that one year, and the cattle just absolutely loved it. That was that was quite a large volume. That was a large volume of mash that they had every week.
That's
That's
awesome.
the year you had the angry cow?
Happy cow.
Patty?
Yeah, as far as education, I just recently worked with the local Boy Scout troops about a project over at Veterans Park, and they approached me about some opportunities for their scout troops, and they are interested in maybe helping the city out with education,
that's
maybe at the Saturday markets, handing out flyers, being posted at places. And they also have been working a lot with bears and bear-proof containers, so that might be another opportunity. So if you don't mind, I'll get you in touch with their troop leader.
Yeah, definitely.
They
That
would be
sounds
very
like
excited.
perfect alignment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Francie?
Yeah, thanks so much. This is really exciting. You guys are doing that. And I'm the manager at Fat Belly Burgers, and a lot of our food
Microphone.
a lot of our food is takeout at Fat Belly. So for a few years now, we don't even have trash receptacles for our customers. We have one in the kitchen. We only have compost and recycling, because everything that they take their food out in, that they eat their food off of, and everything is compostable, and it's the Evergreen Company, and they take it all. So just saying that when you talk to the restaurants, that you would encourage them to make sure that anything that they use that's disposable is compostable, because it really is possible.
Yeah, that's great. And we have, from the restaurants we've been doing outreach with recently, they're already thinking we want to transition to all compostables, even though it's not a requirement in this ordinance. So that's
Great.
great.
Any other questions, comments? Rachel?
Well, just a comment. I think that this is a great step, and we've all been very supportive of your work, and your work has been great. But we're all going to be allowed in future years to phase out single-use plastics, following on your comment. And so again, while we're just starting to work with our restaurants and food service people to understand that, use up their old supplies, and help them find new sources of vendors for materials that are compostable for their to-go food or whatever they're serving now. So, there is a next step after this and a next step after that, but this is a good way to get it started.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely.
And Ward?
Just one more comment. I think the compost at the landfill is a revenue generator for the county as well.
Has been.
I buy it every year.
It's an enterprise zone, so it's a revenue fund for the enterprise zone, not the county as a whole.
Yeah, but that's a great comment and great clarification. The only thing that I would say is that this is a direct overlap between city and county. This is perhaps somewhere we can work together. As Ward and Rachel are saying, you know, we recognize that there's some benefit. We appreciate the fact that the landfill is in the position that it's in, and that the county has taken the time to make our landfill as diversion friendly as possible. So recognizing that, you know, we just open it up to you guys as well to say, if there's some way that this, if there's anything that works together for you to benefit the landfill, or let us know about that as well, because all we know is we're hoping to truck more your way. Other than that, we don't know much more.
Quick comment, I just was thinking about the space issues. I don't know how, if there's room enough in the alleys, it sounds like you found enough space to do it. But I've seen systems in Europe where the trash receptacles were actually in containers underground. So you had that very convenient and clean-looking receptacle above ground. A truck would come and actually pull the canister up out and replace it.
Yeah,
Maybe someday.
I've
but
seen
just
those.
thinking that it's just a really clean way of being able to separate cardboard and compost and recyclables and, multiple vessels but underneath the sidewalk.
yeah, that's the dream, and I know our police department would love that. We have that ability.
Is Soylent Green compostable?
Yes.
It is compost.
Francie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Tori, we all know that the next place where we can work together at the landfill is our construction debris, county and city. So there'll be more on that soon.
All right.
Okay, well,
Thank you so much.
thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah, Kelly.
I do just want to follow up a little bit on what Francie just last said, because, this is forward-thinking. Your demolition quota system, which I don't think we've met since you guys went through that, also is really forward-thinking, and I know you guys took a lot of heat for that, but there is a real direct, I think, correlation between how we manage waste from that decision and as well as the climate impacts related to the residential construction sector. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And which bill is it that could take that away?
1255.
Construction demolition permits?
1255, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and more work to do, We're just starting off on that. You're right, we did take a lot of heat, and we're going to be perfecting that a little bit, so thank you. All right, that'll bring us to our next item on the agenda.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for having me, councilors and commissioners. John Peacock, County Manager. I was asked today to give a presentation on our board's priorities following their retreat. I think there will be, as we just discussed, a lot of opportunities for overlap, partnership, and shared interests within these priorities. The unfortunate part about your staff being so efficient and leaving me so much time is I'll probably fill it. So I'll apologize in advance for that. But just like the council does each year, the board gets together usually for a couple days in a retreat format to talk about and either confirm or identify new priorities. And this year we met back in February 2nd and 3rd. And out of that, we talk about it in terms of our big rocks. And you all may have heard that metaphor before, where with the jar, professor puts it on the desk and puts some rocks in, asks if it's full, and say yeah, and then there's some smaller pebbles, sand, water, and what's the point? Like, there's always room for more. Now, the point is that if you don't get your big rocks in first, you won't get them in at all. And so whether it's in your life or your profession or such, know what your big rocks are. And so these are our big rocks. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these, but jail and criminal justice system planning, child care, housing, particularly affordable housing, of course, growth management, climate change, and of course, airport redevelopment, FBO selection are big on our priorities this year. In terms of the jail, back in 2019, we had suicide in the jail. It was tragic. It did lead us to really assess the facility and practices and such, and that assessment led to a conclusion that this facility that was built back in the early 80s didn't meet some of the modern standards that we'd expect to provide safety for our staff as well as our inmates in the jail. And so we have gone through a process where we've created a criminal justice advisory committee to really assess both programmatic first and then facility needs to support those programs, with the goal of making sure that we're only housing people in the jail that need to be housed, and we're providing the services to try and keep folks from ending up there again. And we've done a lot of assessment and analysis of the population. The Criminal Justice Advisory Committee has a number of representatives from 9th Judicial District, the Chief Judge, DA, Public Defender. We have Police Chief from Snowmass representing law enforcement. We have Public Health. We have Human Services. We have a broad spectrum. Kelly McNicholas Curry from our board is representing the board on that. And this group is really coming together to recommend, okay, what kind of improvements do we need to make systemically, and then what facilities do we need to support it. In the meantime, we are working with other counties and partner agencies to house our inmates. We had an agreement going with Garfield County for a while there. You may have read in the paper that agreement did end back in January. Eagle County has stepped in, and we have an agreement with them to temporarily house inmates. We're using that time to make temporary improvements while we go through this larger planning process to make sure that we have at least 13 beds, 5 work release, 8 regular beds. If we're exceeding that capacity beyond that, we'll continue to work with partners with last resort being a private facility in Park County, which we try to use as little as possible for our inmates. We're in the process of finalizing assessment through a structural engineer of our existing facility to understand what expansion might be possible there by adding a second level. It was originally designed to add a second level back in the early 80s, but codes change. And so we want to make sure that we know what the development possibilities are here. We are also in the process of doing a master plan of our public works site where we're anticipating footprints for various facilities, which could include a jail or public safety facility, so that the board will have alternatives to look at to meet our community needs now and in the future. With that, on April 25th, our Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, who's also includes, of course, sheriff and county staff, will be making a presentation to the Board of County Commissioners based on a number of tours that were done of other facilities and programs throughout the state to really talk about what kinds of needs do we want to be sure we meet within our system here in Pickens County and that we have the facilities to support those programs. What that will do then is set the stage for us to program a new facility, and what kind of spaces do we need? How do we want them organized? Those sorts of things, so that we can bring some design ideas back to the board and start to amend, right, to those designs and such, to what is going to work for our community and what's going to work with the physical space that we have available.
Just a question, what do the initials CJCC stand for?
Oh, thank you. I'm a
Yeah, I
good
think
bureaucrat, and I'm
criminal
using acronyms freely. Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee.
Coordinating committee.
This is a group that we intend to keep together beyond the facility questions, because this is a group that can talk about how are folks moving through the court system, how are bonding schedules working, do we have appropriate programs so that people who may actually need substance abuse or alcohol treatment versus being in jail have an avenue to get them. Mental health. So it's really about the system and the folks in the system sitting around the table and saying, how can we make this work better?
Thank you. I just wasn't familiar. I thought it was a state agency. I was missing.
No, thank you for calling me on that. And BoCC is Board of County Commissioners, of course. So we, of course, will be looking for acceptance of some of those programming standards, both by a sheriff and Board of County Commissioners. That will then lead to design, engineering, and eventually construction of a new facility or renovation of existing facility.
Where's the Public Works site?
So it is down across from the airport, kind of between
It's behind the animal shelter.
Turn off for
CMC and the animal shelter, yeah.
Rafta.
I was just trying to think of what direction that is from the airport, so it's east, a little bit northeast, yeah. So,
That's the right direction.
and another conversation that, we've been having at the staff level is the snow dump in the right place and that sort of thing, both for the city's needs and for our future needs. So those are all conversations that we're doing some schematic conversation around. Any questions on that before? I'm going to try and go through these semi-quick.
No, it's just going to say, it is dedicated, I thought there was money definitely dedicated to childcare. I mean, we're just going from what we read in the newspapers sometimes, but it says that some money may go towards these last two items, or was that a commitment your board already made on childcare?
I'm going to tell you what the commitments are and what so thanks, Rachel. So just as quick background, as the city did, the county received ARPA funds, and I just forgot what that acronym stands for.
Okay. American Rescue.
American Rescue.
So what we have currently done, the board gave direction roughly to use half of that for childcare capacity and potentially roughly half of that around affordable housing projects. And so we have dedicated 1.5 million so far of the 3.4 million to a staff stipend program, which I'll talk about real quick on the next slide. I think you all will be very familiar with it because I think we're doing roughly the same type of program covering different jurisdictions. The remaining funds then, Rachel, so that's where we're looking at applying those funds for capital projects to maintain or expand child care spaces. So we've been meeting with providers and understanding some of them have maintenance needs or minor capital needs that are keeping them from filling beds. Sometimes it's as simple as a shade that they don't have money to put out, that they need to have a few more kids in the summertime. Sometimes it's other capital or maintenance needs. So we're developing that list for the board's consideration, and then there are larger capital projects. You all have your own. Snowmass has a Little Red Schoolhouse that they're looking at participating in expansion on. Basalt has Stotts Mill, and so if there's some way for us to leverage to help move those projects forward. So that's the may, and here's the unknowns at this point. But the board has given direction that these dollars will be spent on those priorities. The staff support stipend, I think, very much is aligned with what the city's doing. It's $6,000 a year per full-time worker. We are doing it in $1,500 quarterly payments per an employee. We've dedicated just over $1.5 million right now over 3 years. And so we have a little bit of a step down right now anticipated in year 3, although the board has asked us to look at opportunities maybe to keep that going through fully through the 3rd year. We identified, awarded for 89 total staff, and the first checks went out in February, and that was exciting for everyone. But the other challenge that the board has asked staff to address and for the board to have some consideration around is this is providing a bridge, right? This is not permanent funding. The ARPA dollars are one-time dollars. This need is going to most likely be ongoing in the community. So how do we identify more permanent and sustainable revenues to continue to apply in partnership to keep this child care capacity going forward? So we're going to be using this time to identify those opportunities and work with our board and the community to identify those alternatives. Housing. Any questions on the child care piece?
Child care questions?
Just a comment more than anything. We've been looking at the same issues about how do you make this last more than, and not just be treading water without a longer accomplishment. But one of the things that we've kind of hit on, and it's a delicate matter, but it deserves being treated, is are the facilities charging something that's close to what would be the full cost and then subsidizing down from there so that the families of means who can fully pay full cost are not subsidized by the daily rate. And that's a real issue. If it's 15%, if it's 20% of the student body is receiving a subsidized rate to begin with, and then it affects the bottom lines of the center, and this is not necessarily a needed subsidy. So that's what we're trying to work with the agencies to actually start charging the fee that reflects your full cost of doing business and paying your employees enough to stay with you. And then being able to subsidize down from there rather than showing a subsidized rate and then all the teachers need money and this program needs money and yet they still actually aren't charging people who could pay the full fare.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point that out as when you're talking about how do we start to see them become more self-sufficient. That is a key element to it, in my mind.
No, I appreciate that. I'm curious how you're analyzing, thank you. I'm curious as to how you're analyzing ability to pay. I mean, I think it does make sense. We want this to be a sustainable industry that, you know,
We're just starting to work with Kids First on that element. There's no real, it's just been pointed out that it's a huge discrepancy that, you know, when a family has $1 million a year income or multiple assets and they're using it for, you know, a relief, that's a good thing, but it should be at the full cost of that service.
Just wonder, because you hear that there's, you know, there's some standards of like 7% of your income. You shouldn't spend more than 7% of your income on, you know, childcare or something like that. I don't know.
Or 30% on housing.
Right. And again, these are like, well, where'd they come up with that number? You know, but like some sort of target, I don't know if that's.
Yeah, again, I was just
you're
saying that's
thinking
something
about.
we've discussed and that we've pointed out is, you know, it's just like saying, you know, everybody empty your pockets, and if you know, I know there's been talk about a regional housing, childcare type of program, tax funded, and then you get to the questions, well, is everybody paying the appropriate rate? And you have to answer those questions before you can go to the public to say, let's form a childcare district or something like that, in my mind.
And oh, sorry.
Sarah, did you have some input on that?
Yeah, just to clarify that affordability is determined by our financial aid calculator for families. And that takes into account their housing costs, their wages, and the household size, and their residency location. And so we use it as a percentage of AMI for initial eligibility to get an application in to take a look at. The City Council has Kids First Advisory Board appointees look at that pretty closely, and they've been adjusting that up, particularly what's been happening with inflation. And the intentions is that as the true cost of service is better prepared and presented, and we are providing business counseling to help our providers do that, then in turn we expect that we'll increase our financial aid pool, because then we'll actually be able to see where the need is.
I appreciate that, because I could see that middle income folks getting squeezed more for childcare expenses, so thanks.
And then another thing that we're using this time for is, of course, we have not been involved in the child care space like the city has, and so we're forming those relationships. But also understand, I think we're seeing some differences in bench depth, right, amongst providers, and doing that type of business planning that you're talking about, even with themselves. And so understanding those needs and capacity building, and how might we play a role in that, while also doing this assessment on the other side. And so
I can simply say it is a pleasure and welcome to see the county support and participation in this major community issue. Thank you.
Yeah, one of our top 3 goals is childcare, early childhood education, and backfilling salaries for providers is part of that, and we welcome you to that program. But another aspect is, and it was just mentioned, is the capacity. You mentioned it, and that, you know, we've been working on capacity at Burlingame 3, and we welcome the county commissioners to get engaged in that. Affordability, capacity, and accessibility, and, you know, what's fair, the fees that are charged, that it has to be affordable, but the building capacity, I think, is also important, and I see it as an ongoing need. I know that our program is looking at a temporary and ramping down backfilling, but I see there as an ongoing need to backfill wages. So that's something that we need to have in our budget, and the county hopefully will put in their budget, and this is a key area that hopefully the county and the city can work together and find it as a common goal.
Tori.
Rachel?
Yeah, sorry. One last tangent that I think is just interesting to all of us. This was in the Colorado Sun's paper about the state budget long bill. So this is the quote. Finally, the budget includes $9 million for the Department of Corrections to be spent on $1,000 per month housing stipends for 1,133 staffers through February of 2024. The money will be targeted to Department of Corrections staff serving in the Buena Vista, Sterling, and Lyman correctional facilities. So prison workers are getting a $1,000 a month subsidy for housing in Sterling, Buena Vista, and Lyman. That shows how bad the housing crisis is everywhere, and our child care workers deserve the stipend just as much as anybody's prison workers. Thank you.
all right, thanks. And I know another shared priority is housing and affordable housing, which has been a challenge for everyone throughout the state, especially coming out of COVID. So in terms of the board's conversations around this, they're is a lot of recognition that we really need to review and look at our land use and master plan policies. We talked about that a lot and reached some agreement about where it is and isn't, particularly with all the rural areas in the county, for us to have affordable housing. And so there are likely to be some changes or amendments to those policies coming up, and clarity around that. And so that's part of our conversation this year. There are regional housing efforts I know that the city's been actively involved in, as has the county, like the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition and Housing Stability Coalitions, and those will continue to be priorities. All of a sudden, I can't change. We have a number of projects and partnerships that we're trying to bring to some conclusion or get initiated this year. Of course, I think you all are aware of Phillips Corner. That is a property that was purchased by the county to preserve mobile home parks that weren't formally deed restricted, but were effectively acting as affordable housing. We're in schematic design right now, looking at roughly 73 total units, including 35 stick-built, and the remainder in mobile units. The board is still working through those particular design. You all are aware the various steps that those types of projects go through. Will require new water, wastewater infrastructure, road infrastructure, stormwater, some debris flow infrastructure, and we're estimating now roughly be about a $35 million project at this point. We're also in partnership with Eagle County right now, and working with the Forest Service, not unlike what the city's been really leading with the S-curve conversation, to look at possibly acquiring land adjacent to Crown Mountain Park. We used to call it the Tree Farm, for a combination of conservation, recreation, but also affordable housing. And so we're still working through. We've gone through the environmental process right now. We have our findings and are expecting to have appraisals back, which will give us a good sense of what our possibilities are there. S-curves, I think you all are well aware of that. I know Sarah and her team have been taking a lot of leadership on that project, and there's some local employers, including the county, at the table to see if there's something that can be thread together there. CDOT at Hook Spur is looking at developing some housing there. We're talking to them about possible partnerships. And so we have a few projects, and then of course we're continuing to do one-off buy downs and that sort of thing for the community and also our own employees. Of course, West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition, city is a partner in that, just like the county. Skip through those pretty quick because I'm sure you're well aware of these. Probably the bigger conversation, though, that came out of the retreat is really an understanding that for us to be an effective partner, right? We don't want to be the guy in the truck bed pushing on the back window trying to move the truck. We need more resources. And, when we look at a 10-year run between 2012 and 2022, we spent, between 21, 22 million bucks on housing. And for comparison, that's, I believe, what the city collected in rent in 1 year for housing in 2022. And so we recognize, and we know that some of you on council, raised this as a concern. And so it was a conversation that, as we finalize our policies about where it's appropriate to have housing and such, we also need to have the resources to be an effective partner at the table, both to help our partners bring projects to conclusion, right? There's lots of things we could be partnering on with the city of Aspen, with Snowmass Village, with Basalt, with more resources. And so we're going to be really continuing that conversation on April 18th with the board about what are some options for us to consider to give us the resources to be a more serious player in this housing space and more seriously address the gaps in housing and get direction on next steps, how we might pursue those options. Before I move to climate.
One second, Ward?
Yeah, if you can figure out how to get 78 units for 35 million, please let us know. It seems really low for what we've seen.
Well, let's be fair. More than half of those units are really pads, right? So that doesn't include the cost of the structure, which in this case would be a mobile home, right, on top of those. The vertical construction on the stick-built units, we have an advantage there just because the property cost is lower to get to those overall costs. And so I think that's particular to the project and the infrastructure that we have to scale to it, but and also land costs. What is not included, as Commissioner Poshman is going to point out here in a second if I don't, are there costs when you're developing outside of an urban growth boundary where other services may not be as readily available that aren't included in those numbers too. And so generally it is the board's policy to try and participate in housing development within urban growth boundaries. To preserve housing with minor expansion when you're outside urban growth boundaries. And the conversation is really about then, are there places where it would be appropriate, where there are transit nodes or other services to develop affordable housing that may be outside urban growth boundaries. But there are probably some costs in there that aren't included. How'd I do, Greg? Did I cover that okay? Okay.
Another question on that. You said community and employee housing. Does the county have an employee housing program of its own? And of these 78 units, what do you anticipate would be available to the community and what to your key employees?
So we do have housing programs for our own employees. They are not adequate at this point to cover the demand or the need. When we're talking about community housing in this case, though, we're expanding beyond the concept of just workforce housing. And so, Ward, I think you've been participating, if I remember correctly, on the housing stability group, for example. And so there could be housing needs that may or may not fit within the 4 squares of workforce housing. That address other community needs in terms of transitional housing or those sorts of things. And so we're going to look at that full spectrum. I think right now we have not had the conversation about any of these units being reserved out, particularly for Pickens County employees at this point. We will look at threading funding partners together because for us to do a $35 million project, we actually need to have partners at the table to do that, and we have some folks who are interested right now, so it may be providing workforce housing as those partners come in.
Do you have any timeline on that?
On the
The 35 and 38, 35 stick, 38.
Yeah, so we're hoping to be through design this summer, and we would like to be breaking ground on infrastructure. Right now, our pro forma is built around breaking ground on the infrastructure and such in 2024.
Thank you.
It's not surprising to see high cost, try to buy a new car these days, and nothing, a dollar just isn't what it's worth anymore, $1 million always sound like $1 million, but it only buys what 600,000 used to 3 years ago, so that's a bit of a reality for us. And when we were on APSHA, we were looking at the price of new mobile homes being pulled in and built to winter standards and installed, and I think they were thinking around 250,000 each, or.
Well, some of the trailers are valued that high, but not bringing in.
No, the new modulars is what I was trying to think about when we were
Yeah,
talking
well,
about that.
there are a couple of places that have them for like 150,000, but that doesn't include the pad and the electricity and stuff, yeah.
And building something that's because I was just trying to think, if that was 20 units at 200,000 each, that's another 4 million on the project. And were you including the land cost in the 35 million number, or?
Actually, that is just the construction
Just the construction,
redevelopment, so it'd be a $42 million total, so that's another, thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, no, I just,
the land
just because Ward was trying to think about it in comparison to lumberyard, and I was sitting here going, well, it's about $500,000 a unit, that's about, but it's not, it's a little more than $500,000 a unit, and that's.
And the land costs today are really different.
Oh, yeah.
We would never get that for.
Oh,
that
and
price now.
neither would we, so, exactly. Yeah, it's not easy.
Not easy. We have a number, just like the city, climate change is I think kind of an overarching or umbrella kind of goal. It is brought up really in just about everything that the county does. Some of the particular initiatives we're working on right now, we're in design phase for a microgrid. Right now, that would tie together the airport, our public works facilities that we were talking about before, and the RAFTA maintenance facility. And really the goal there is to make them both resilient and net zero through solar and battery storage and load management software. The resiliency benefit is really what kicked this project off, and it was the Lake Christine fire, and probably a lot of you remember the picture, that last pole halfway burned that was holding up our power lines, and that really got us thinking about, okay, how do we start to combine these resiliency and climate benefit goals? And so microgrid is one way of doing that. It uses locally produced, so we'd be tying in that 5 megawatt solar facility that was built on the Aspen Sand property, additional solar that would be built at our public works site and RAFTA site, and then we've identified a number of locations for additional solar at the airport if and when that redevelopment moves forward. Black sky days, when things go bad, that uses load management software that can basically make the microgrid versus the macro grid and feed those facilities from batteries, which are getting recharged through solar. And then, of course, the climate benefits, the solar's feeding into the broader grid on the blue sky days, which we have a lot more of, thankfully. As far as the overall project goes right now, there's about 8.2 megawatt hours that need to be built out. The full microgrid build out is about 4.5 megawatts of batteries and integration of solar. It is about a $24 or $30 million project. Seems to be our sweet spot on projects these days. We're in phase 1A, which is 3.35 million of that. We've gotten some DOLA funding and some partner funding, with the balance of it coming from the county. That will get us 35% design on the entire project. It'll get our first battery and switches installed, and start to connect in those solar facilities that we talked about. So that is moving forward right now. The other piece of that is presumably this is the future of grids, right? It's going to be set up in microgrids with some combination of energy coming in from outside the area and locally produced energy. How do we make a business model that supports that so that our utilities can continue to be successful, and it's fair to those who are hosting and developing the infrastructure for solar, electricity storage, those sorts of things. So we're working on that with Holy Cross right now too.
Yeah, to tag on to that, John, I see that we got a special grant from the state to do this study at the Airport Business Center in the airport. And we were the only project in the whole state that they accepted for like innovative projects they wanted to put money into. But in the Aspen community, I would see a microgrid being by every place where there's a cluster of essential buildings. So the schools, hospital area would have one microgrid. This campus here would have a microgrid, for instance, where there would be, in case of a power outage, the microgrid would have the capability of staying lit and operational for, especially where there are places with essential public services.
I think this is really exciting. I want to tie this into, I think there might be opportunities here that we don't even know about. Tori and I, and I'm not sure who else was with us at the CAST meeting, but Steamboat had an issue where their water treatment plant needed to build a cooling tower because their water was hotter than they wanted it to be entering the stream. Because of the proximity of their recreation center, they were able to build a heat pump from the water treatment center and used it to cool the ark, I believe. Isn't that how it worked? At any rate, the reason it worked was because the facilities were close to each other. And here we have a lot of your facilities close to each other. I'm wondering if there's a place where heat's being produced that could be used to heat another part of your campus.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up, because another part of the larger grant and analysis that we're looking at is, we're calling it an ectogrid, and I'm not quite sure why, to be honest with you, but it's exactly, yeah, if you want to come up, Kara, you can probably explain it better than me, but it's exactly what you're talking about is, for those heating and cooling needs, how do you connect a network between facilities there so that when one is too hot, you can share that with one that's too cold, or vice versa. County facility was actually designed that way, where we're moving air around from portions of the building that are getting too hot to portions of the building that are cooler before we put energy in to heat or cool the air as a
The commissioner's room heats the entire building.
pretty much. And Kara can, and this is Kara Silbernagel, Deputy County Manager.
She's a new deputy county manager.
I know, I'm getting used to saying it even.
Yeah. Congratulations, Kara. Thank you. John got a lot of it right. I would just add part, but I'll add some to it.
She's not gonna last long enough.
To your point, so the whole project actually, in addition to the microgrid that's up here, also does have an integration, and it's really with Holy Cross's leadership, and where they want to go is an integration that would share that heating and cooling across the 3 different facilities. And one part of this is also It's not in the near future because it is somewhat determinant of the airport redevelopment. And so the ectogrid piece John was talking about is there is heating and cooling of runway systems that then would actually be across all 3 different facilities is something that we're looking at, which is in a few years out.
Very cool.
And I think we're also, if I might, looking at, as the project moves on, bringing in more partners like possibly CMC who's out there, Aspen Water and Sand, some of the cities, Mountain Rescue, we don't, since they're all in that neighborhood, but this is just a starter, a kickstart to see where it's going to go.
It all sounds really great and innovative and type of things we should be doing. Where is the solar farm that's going to feed the power into this? And how much does it want to produce?
So right now, the way Holy Cross has the design, the 5 megawatt existing facility will feed into that.
So the one they put out by W/J?
And we've identified another potential, I believe, almost 4 megawatts of potential solar at the airport and on land that the county owns. And then I can't remember the amounts on Public Works.
Yeah, there's about 300 kilowatts then in addition between the RAFTA maintenance facility as well as the Public Works facility that would kind of, again, be sharing on all the production.
And is that conceived to be rooftop, or is that using some of the land you were thinking about you might need for a new jail or for housing?
Public Works and RAFTA, it would be rooftops.
Rooftops.
Or carports or something.
Yeah. That type.
And airport, there's a lot of work to do there, which we'll get to in a few slides here. But that would probably be a combination of ground mounted on land that may not be appropriate for other uses, as well as, do we cover all our parking lots, cover the vehicles and do those sorts of things, put it on the facilities out there. There's lots of
A lot of square footage on that roof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we see all of that as opportunity right now, working with the FAA and such, but other facilities have done similar, other airports have done similar type of solar development, and so we think those are all opportunities for us.
Thank you.
I wonder if there's an opportunity we have a meeting next week with EOTC, and we're talking about the park and ride with capital improvements going there and making covered parking there as part of a microgrid to benefit both the parking public and to run a power line over to part of a microgrid.
And the meeting's this week, or just so you don't miss it. The day after tomorrow. Yeah. Want to make sure you're there.
Yeah, and this is a lot for the community too, because these are, these large solar installations are, they're serving our goal in terms of renewable energy, and they have other impacts that the community is worried about. So that's going to be a conversation for all of us going forward.
Yeah. Through Club 20 and the Ag Committee, I've been hearing a lot more about solar farming and people installing solar in between the rows, different crops, and finding it's still highly productive and almost shields them from too much sun sometimes. And, it might be something Open Space and Trails ends up looking at in their own way for a lot of the land mid-valley.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to look at this. This project is a good learning project for all of us, and so hopefully we'll have some key learnings that will make these more possible going forward. Other quick hits. Our climate action plan is coming up on 5 years old, so we're going to be looking to update that. We are going to be hiring a position that will help us focus on that. We have, as we talked about earlier, the continued development of our construction and demolition program at the landfill. We are also, along those lines, looking at landfill expansion right now, also to continue to meet those community needs. We are finalizing a study on the feasibility of electrifying all of our county buildings. So I have a number of county buildings that are using natural gas. We're trying to understand what would it take to convert those to electric, because that's the way we're going to get them to be renewable. And so that assessment is, I think we're planning on having that done late May, early June. And then the biggie is really what is happening with growth management. And so want to chat about that for a little bit here, because we're going to have a lot coming up fairly soon. So the board established a vision around growth management, which is to utilize growth management in the land use code to meet our climate action goals while creating equitable, sustainable, and resilient regional quality of life and economy for the future. We created a growth management committee to really advise us. We had recommendations that came forward in 2020, and we had done that with a lot of public outreach, but it was public outreach that was more kind of open house or one-time kind of participation. And when recommendations came forward, we had a lot of community concern expressed at that meeting. October 6th, 2020, I remember it very well. And so the board took a step back to study it more, and this time created a growth committee that could go through a learning process together, and really a growth committee that represents the different interests and represents our community, and is working through some tough compromises. They came up with their areas of common ground around the board's vision. And so the board's more specific goals with this is to try and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 90% by 2050, residential net zero in terms of our building codes by 2030, while maintaining a healthy economy for everyone in the community. The growth committee, and I won't read through all of these, came up with a set of shared values that they felt like in their diverse representation of our community, they felt were important, and went through an exercise of what do we want more of, what do we want less of, as just kind of a grounding there. And then the big topics that our committee is working on right now, really revisiting zoning and land use patterns. How do they affect climate? How do they affect equity? How do they affect economy? And are there changes that we could make to balance those better? Residential house size. I think we can expect recommendations that will change the overall cap on house size in the county. What those recommendations will be, the committee is working on. I'll give you the timeline here in a second. Residential redevelopment. How are we going to apply these standards to redevelopment? Really looking at our growth management quota system, assuming the state allows us to continue to have one, and our transfer development rights. How do we align those better to meet these climate and community goals that the board has established? And then looking at our affordable housing policies and short-term rental policies. Where we stand right now, the committee is in their last set of meetings. This group has worked really hard, as has the staff supporting them. In March, the committee really spent time getting to those final set of recommendations and alternatives. Right now, they're meeting in April to really refine those and make decisions. There's not, as you can imagine, total agreement just yet amongst the committee members. We've challenged them to the greatest degree possible to see where they can reach consensus and allow minority reports, of course, where they can't. So April into beginning of May, the committee will be finalizing their recommendations. I believe their last meeting is April 26th. They're targeting April 26th for them to finalize recommendations, and we'll be scheduling time in May then for those to be presented to the board and to begin to get recommendations.
Quick question here.
Yeah.
So John, are we going to meet with the committee again, or is the staff just going to bring us the recommendation?
Oh, no, the committee is going to be bringing, these are the
Okay.
committee's recommendations.
Thank you.
Yeah, committee is going to be bringing those forward. And so based on then the board's review and recommendations, we'll be looking for board direction on what amendments we should be making both to our master plans and land use codes. Then that will go into our more traditional process with our planning and zoning commission and board making final approval. And so the initial, Francie, what we are anticipating is a joint meeting of the Board of County Commissioners and our Planning and Zoning Commission to hear the recommendations of the Growth Management Committee. So that's going to be a big community process that we've been going through that I think is going to lead to some pretty significant recommendations for changes to our land use code and master plans coming up here in May.
Ward, then John, then Rachel.
John, could you send us the decks that? I couldn't read all of the more of and less of.
Yeah, no, I try to do eye tests as much as possible in these, just so you don't fall asleep. You're struggling with something, but yeah, be happy to share that. I'll share that with Sarah. Let her
John,
distribute
and
those.
Rachel.
I just wanted to say this sounds like an opportunity for a lot of pushback from the community. The possibility of lowered house sizes and so on. I would.
Be brave, comrade.
I was going to say something like that. I just want to say this board has your backs. Be strong.
Rachel?
Yeah, and I, again, appreciate taking on a very difficult role. You guys have a really full plate, you know, looking through all these projects and all these things that are going on, and a lot with a relatively small staff. We know that, too. So thank you for that. The only thing that really strikes me is that by the time I spent my 12 years on the Board of County Commissioners, the board before had passed a new land use code, but I spent 12 years dealing with people who had sought their approvals and had something under the old land use code. And I imagine you're still getting new applications where by right, when 3 TDRs, I can go up to 15,000 square feet and things like that. So, you know, all I'm saying is I look at this process and I think you're just going to have a land rush of people to get permission or whatever they need to keep a permit alive for 10 years with little teeny incremental changes that they'll totally countervene what your committee is going to have recommended. And they're going to be like, well, how come they're still building these things? And so to really think about how to deal with that, because that's why we're still seeing that type of level of growth on Red Mountain and Castle Creek and all over the place.
Yeah, that's right.
And as the committee finalizes its work, we'll be anticipating some of that.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to say that some of this is why we've scheduled the topics that we have for our joint meetings, is because we've really been allowing 2023 to bring forward some of these recommendations, and your board's doing some of this work as we speak. So just to remind everybody that that's part of why we've kind of scheduled this out. We wanted this update and to talk to you guys here before we may tackle some of these larger, big rocks together later in the year.
You know, and it kind of sounds like if the state does get rid of growth management in any way, shape, or form, I don't know that there's going to be any legs for a TDR program to stand on in the future. It's going to be, well, thank goodness we got what we did, preserved, but now that's that. And I'm wondering if the state's going to come back in a year or 2 years and say, okay, no 35-acre zoning, it's 1 house per 5 acres. That's how we'll solve the problem.
Well, this House Bill 1255 is of great concern. Great concern.
Thank you.
Question on that, Tori, did Sarah say that council is crafting a letter on 1255? I believe we decided to do the same, and I'm just wondering if there are any joint efforts. I'm assuming we're not the only 2 communities in the state, but I don't know. But it seems like we should be making as much noise as we can.
I think every organization I know of is in opposition, meaning electeds and government.
There's several mountain resort communities that are in opposition of it. I can't speak on the county side of it, but I know on the municipal side, we've been in contact with each other regarding the bill. The other piece with us is that we are aware of like Northwest COG, Q&Q's taking an opposition standpoint to it. So there's definitely several government representatives. We're waiting to hear who was this bill really targeted at. So if anyone learns that in your own work on the bill, it would be great to know whose problem is it they're trying to fix, because I'm not sure that it's the mountain communities.
Lakewood and Boulder.
Yeah.
You think
That's
it's,
what we're
I figured it was Boulder. I wasn't sure who else.
Yeah, Lakewood also put in a growth cap recently that is pushing development out.
All right.
Okay.
Now, the easy one.
Y'all probably haven't heard anything about this. Yeah, so we are continuing to move forward, looking at our airport. I know, Tori, you were a participant in the process that we went through that culminated, as it turns out, in March 2020. And I remember that because I was at the last meeting of our Vision Committee where they were taking a final vote on their recommendations after having been part of that and I had to leave the meeting before the vote to go to the first meeting about COVID. I think actually I was presenting to City Council at that time, yeah. And so, but we do have the Vision Committee recommendations, the Common Ground recommendations that really resulted from a 18-month, pretty intensive public process. Where we are right now, within those Common Ground recommendations, the Vision Committee had recommended a different layout plan, basically for the airport than the one that had been previously approved by the FAA. So we are working right now with the FAA to revise that airport layout plan and get it as close as we can to the Vision Committee recommendations. That work has begun. We've hired Jacobson Daniels as our consultant. We're working through fleet mix forecasts and more of the engineering side and conversations with the FAA right now to understand their concerns about how the airfield would operate and that sort of thing. But we are anticipating a November submission to the FAA for approval. That will have to go back to our Board of County Commissioners to have them approve the new airport layout plan before that. And of course, we'll go through our Airport Advisory Board throughout that process. We're also looking this year as we move through, we get more clarity on that airport layout plan process to begin our design process for the terminal. I think that's one area where it seems like everyone in the community agrees that it is time to modernize that facility. So we're going to be looking to put out an RFP for architectural services this year and begin a public process that includes our airport advisory board and also the larger public in that design process, which was a commitment we made during the vision. One that's been getting a lot of attention lately and that we're in the process of is fixed-based operation selection process. We received proposals that our deadline was February 10th. Those proposals are currently under review by a selection committee. Final interviews took place this week. The committee is meeting again this week to score the proposals and take into account the interviews to develop a recommendation for the priority that proposals will come into us. Final contract recommendations will come back to the Board of County Commissioners, at which time they'll be able to evaluate the proposal of the successful bidder and contract terms. And, you know, there's always that option, should the board decide to have the county operate the FBO itself. So we will, at the county itself, we'll be having that conversation based on the financial data. We had done an assessment prior to issuing the the request for proposals to understand what we thought that would look like for the county, and we can assess that against the successful bidder and contract. And so that will all be coming forward to the board. We're still a ways out from that final decision. We do need to have that decision made by September. So we're anticipating that decision coming to the board and public over the next few months. Any questions on that? I was anticipating there might be some.
John?
I had questions about the FBO and the county's involvement, but you've answered those questions.
Okay.
Board of Rachel?
That was the plan.
County? I'll make a couple comments. Let's see, when it comes to the FBO, I think that all of you, as well as the selection committee members, have heard from the public. You know that our expectations are for the best deal for our community. And, you know, I think you guys have heard an earful, so I think there's a lot of trust that you guys know what your community is asking of you. So when it comes to the FBO, I don't have a whole bunch of comments, just to, you know, again, as John was saying on the other issue, you know, we want to have your back and support you. So I have confidence that you're moving forward with that process really well. When it comes to the airport, you know, it'd be wonderful to move this forward. We all are looking for there's airside and landside. Is that how it's delineated? We're all excited about landside improvements. There are still members of the community that have questions about the airside, and those questions are wide-ranging, to be quite honest. So it'd be wonderful if the airport layout plan can be submitted with not the flexibility, but the understanding that things may change. You know, get the landside going on. We all know that there's airside improvements that can be made, but most importantly is to get something ready to go so that we can start on those landside improvements. Without, and I say without locking ourselves into something that in 10 years may not actually want to come to fruition. But I also, you know, through all the conversations that I've heard with the FAA I do not believe to be as rigid an organization as they perhaps once were. So I think that they're well aware of the conversation that's going on in our community.
Well, and we are going to have a representative from the FAA here next week at a joint meeting with the Board of County Commissioners and our Airport Advisory Board, where we're going to put a lot of these community questions, to them so that we can understand, what the current position of the agency is.
The meeting's at 9 o'clock in our meeting room.
Yeah.
Which day?
Tuesday.
Tuesday at 9 o'clock. I'll go at 9 to 11:30. And I suspect we'll use every minute of that time.
Going to be fun. I don't think you're going to want to miss it.
Yeah.
And then Tuesday at 9. There we go.
Yeah, yeah, for you, it's PM,
Yeah, I did really well by about midnight.
till 11:30 at night.
Then another thing that came out of the vision process, we did create a flight ops safety task force that's making recommendations to our airport advisory board on improvements for GA safety. And that then will come to the Board of County Commissioners. And then just some smaller projects that we're getting done this year. We are going to be doing the analysis on, our airspace and how that's used. We know that that gets jammed up, and we hear that, commercial flights sometimes get diverted because there's so many planes that come in on a first come, first served basis, right? And that's how the FAA is managing that airspace. So are there any alternatives? Are there ways for us to look at our fees and pricing around meeting our greenhouse gas goals? We're currently working on setting those baseline and metrics for criteria pollutants and reaching out to partners on that and looking at opportunities to update our noise policy. And then, on the physical side, we do still have to keep the airport operational. So we are going to be resurfacing taxiways and de-ice pads on the east side. And the airport, as a result, will be closed May 10th to May 24th. So we will get an off-season for sure. We'll also be installing new FAA precision approach path indicators. Right now, those are incandescent lights that burn out. Sometimes don't work, and we can't land commercial aircraft when that happens. That's caused some diversions. We're going to go to an LED system that uses less electricity and is more reliable. And then we'll be replacing worn and faded runway markings. And that.
John, isn't also part of that project going to be to adapt things for the next the new jets that could be coming in that have different?
That one, this doesn't, it doesn't implement the next gen at this point.
No, not the ones where I thought we had to redo where the tails, the noses get tied down and there's a little discrepancy between the CRJ 700.
Thank you, Patty. I know what you're talking about now. So we are anticipating that the CRJ 700 will not be used by airlines forever. We're anticipating a transition that could include the Embraer 175. That aircraft is a different size, and so we need to paint where the airplanes can park differently. We had to buy new or bridges and stairs that can reach and
A little bit
those sorts of
higher and a
things,
little
yeah.
bit different nose angle, so.
Or concrete.
so that
Thank you, Patty.
different
Yeah, it
kind-
took me a
So
second
it's a
to catch up there.
transition, we figured we're doing it, we might as well get those other things done. We tried to do the project without closing the airport in May, but when thought we were in that direction, but FAA came back and said they had safety concerns about construction so we were unable to keep the airport open. We tried.
And we would have had limited capacity really for months. It would have been phased over 2 months, so.
Get it done.
Have you guys looked at putting bumpers on the runways to keep the private jets?
Yeah,
Guardrails.
yeah.
Guardrails.
There are bathtub type slip things on the side. You keep hearing about them slipping off.
Yeah. Well, but it'll be fascinating to see how the investigation comes back on the one that one was on takeoff, not on landing, and so.
The one yesterday was on takeoff? Or not yesterday, but.
Push the wrong
day
button.
Yeah.
Pilot on the
Sunday.
phone,
It was prob-
distracted driving.
Probably like,
So
a
thank you
beautiful
for
day.
giving me the time. Nobody fell asleep. I really appreciate that. And,
This is all riveting. So, last comment for me, you know, I think the airport is one of those great examples of where people want better without bigger, you know? I don't think many people are asking for a ton more air service or bigger airplane air service. We just want it better, you know?
And safer.
Yeah, you know, more reliable, more safer, but, you know, I think that there's a lot of concerns about the airport being a growth generator because of access. I don't want to get into that because I have different opinions myself, but, yeah, I just, you know, you guys have this is big. At the end of, we had Dan, the airport director, at our last ACRA meeting last week, and after, I just went up to him and just wished him well, because, you know, it's a big undertaking, a lot of community impact, and I just wanted to give him the spirit and the strength to, you know, carry through. You
I'm
know,
sorry I missed that, but
it's all in the best interest of our community, so.
And Dan's actually on. He heard that again in case I needed a lifeline on a question.
Good work, well done.
he's a good guy.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much for that update. That really helps bring us up to speed on some of the things that you guys are working on, and most definitely the things that you're prioritizing. So that's very helpful for us. We also, you know, the conversations that we've had over the last, let's call it 6 months or whatever, are being reflected in the work plan that you guys have going on. So just a lot of appreciation, I think, from me personally, but I think my board would agree with that.
Can I ask, John, can we provide this, your presentation, to the incoming council members? We plan to. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to send that to Sarah right now.
Oh, Sarah, watch out.
All right, and with that, while he's doing that, we've got about 15 minutes left, and we had just two little markers on our agenda at the bottom there. The one is that we want to discuss next meeting topics. What do we want to tackle? Just for a second, we want to have an opportunity for members of both boards to say, hey, I think this is timely. I think this is what we need to be talking about next. That kind of thing. So with that, Sarah?
Sure. In the planning meeting in January, we had with Francie and Tori and John and I, we discussed third quarter really being focused on housing and growth management for both entities. We are excited to really have that be an in-depth conversation for you, and would encourage you to contemplate a media agenda about where do the two entities go going forward. That meeting is on July 18th. Our friends over at the Aspen Institute have graciously offered to host us. If we would like to have that as a longer meeting, they view this as a critical issue for our community, and they want to be a partner in supporting your dialogue on it. So we have thought about, we can provide updates on funding, we can provide updates on strategic plans at the city side of where we are. I do think that it's really important we have some conversations around deed restrictions and around maintenance. Some things like that we would recommend to you as agenda topics. And you want to add anything to that, John?
You know, that can change dramatically depending upon the state legislature. So
Right, well,
that could make
fortunately, well, unless there's a special session, we should have clarity.
Yeah, we will. That's what I'm saying. That's, so we will know what we're getting into or out of.
But it's possible that some of the county BoCC talks in particular around some of the housing items that you put on the screen tonight will not be fleshed out by July.
Might be.
We should have a lot more direction, and the conversation, I think, could be fruitful between the bodies at that point, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should have we will have our report from our Growth Advisory Committee, and so.
Real close.
So we could share that with you guys, the actual specifics of where we are with that, because that's a lot different than just the general overview.
Yeah, just a couple of things that are tangential but feed into this, I hope. So that everyone knows, and Greg is our board member, but Root Eye Water and Power Authority on May 11th is having a really full kind of retreat structured day of all the members in the valley to say, okay, what do you guys really want to advance, and will you help pay for it? Route I Water and Power Authority raised our dues slightly last year so that we can continue to pay for 8 hours a week worth of management. And you may remember when the watershed plan was completed with dollars from the Healthy Rivers and Stream Fund, there was a lot of, oh, these are all the projects that would improve the watershed as a whole. Carbondale put in some, Basalt put in some, the county put in some, but there's no one shepherding any of them through. And as Mark Fuller was transitioning out, it was that, okay, we're gonna check in with the communities and see, do they want Route I Water and Power Authority to start doing these problems, overseeing these projects, and taking care of some of the many issues. They are designated by the state as our spokesperson on water issues because of that FRIARC project. But anyhow, I just want to make sure that there's really a lot of attention paid to the input that Pickens County can give at that meeting. You have the Healthy Rivers and Stream Funds. You're starting to fund the collaborative meeting again, and again, that date is just May 11th.
We have a Board of Health retreat that day,
Okay, I have no idea.
just to let you know.
Yeah, well, I don't know how that all lined up. Maybe one or the other can change, but, you know, I've always fought, and I'm bringing this forward for future agendas as a tie-in, there really needs to be a lot more cooperation and coordination between the city of Aspen and Pickens County on our water issues coming forward. What we're seeing with potential buy and dry on the west slope is nuts. And if this housing proposal goes forward with the Front Range metropolitan areas all adding an ADU to their homes, we can just about guarantee that the Front Range is going to come back for the remaining 20% of conditional water rights on the Frying Pan and on Hunter Creek and on Roaring Fork. And so I think being ever more shoulder to shoulder on water issues and following what's going on with that is going to just be ever more important. I did attend, because I didn't have a Monday meeting and I didn't have a work schedule, a roundtable for the first time in a long time. And boy, is the River District handing out a lot of money these days. And they've actually hired 2 technical advisors to help people pull down as much of this federal money as they possibly can, because the spigot is on. There is lots of federal money for anything that's a water efficiency, clean water, water storage, all sorts of stuff. And so I just wanted to emphasize, I think that and how can the city and the county coordinate better and work better and maximize what you have with the Healthy Rivers and Streams Fund, because an awful lot of that is collected in the city of Aspen, and we don't have our own water fund, and we'd like to be able to make sure that it's doing double duty for the whole watershed and for all of us. And so that's kind of the major thing. I wanted to say should perhaps be at least some topic. Hopefully, we're not having wildfire topics this summer, and hopefully people do a little mitigation with the overgrowth that's going to come from all this wetness. But the other thing would be similar to what Patty, I think, was kind of saying, is a bit of a legislative debrief. You know, once the session's over in May and, you know, whenever the bills start taking effect, there's going to be a lot of things that affect cities and counties, and kind of understanding what the intersection is on those things. A legislative debrief might be a good topic too. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other items burning the brain?
I'd like to see a after-action report from the SWAT call between the different agencies that are school, county, city, first responders, to see where we are on that and be briefed on that.
I'd encourage you to reach out to the sheriff's office. They're responsible for that.
So we did do an after-action, and we're going to be doing a conversation with the board, and we'd be happy to work with Sarah to get on a future agenda for the council if you'd like that same debrief.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've asked for that, so.
When's that going to be?
Well, beyond tomorrow is pretty hard for me to think about right now.
Not on our agenda.
Yeah, I don't have it on the future agendas yet. We're working with Michael on that.
Okay.
Your face just went,
I know, like,
I don't know my calendar. I don't know our land range calendar. All right, well, there's a couple to be piling on. John, did you have something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to catch you guys up. Kelly and I have both been working on the wild and scenic designation for the Crystal River, which is part of our watershed.
Fabulous park.
And she's on the stakeholder group, and I'm on the coalition. And she has, if you want to speak about the stakeholder group when I'm done, I'll just catch them up on the coalition. So the coalition is like a group, a big group of people, but only a few are really active. And so we are working on getting community support so that when the senators hopefully consider whether or not to take this to the Congress, they realize that we have a lot of community support. So we've been pretty active, and there's a meeting coming up on April 27th that Kelly can tell you about.
So, Pickens County's in an interesting profile on this issue because our constituents have long supported the designation of the Crystal for a wild and scenic river. And however, we are only one, stakeholder in the river. And so what we had committed to over the last year was really bringing together all the meaningful stakeholders on the river to have a community conversation about, what principles for protection we could all agree on, what pathways for protection would be available for the river and the communities, and to hopefully come out of a stakeholder process with that being figured out to present to our congressional delegation for some permanent protections down the line. And so this is, kind of that first big real conversation is kicking off on April 27th. We've brought together the River District, Gunnison County, the town of Marble, who else? Us. And as sort of the chairs of that and funding this whole effort, along with Northwest COG that's serving as our fiscal agent, we've hired a facilitator, a facilitation group to guide and lead this community conversation. And, our hope is that it will create, language for a bill ultimately that our delegation would be supportive of introducing in Congress. So this process is supposed to start now and then take the remainder of the year, and we'll hopefully be able to get to a point where we have reached that consensus. So it's one of the things we're doing.
Great work, both of you. Very nice.
Steve?
I haven't even announced this to the Board of Commissioners yet, but this year at National Farmers Union in early March, that I was one of the delegates from Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, we got a comprehensive Western Rivers policy section put into National Farmers Union policy, which will be used as guidance for the lobbyists from National Farmers Union at Congress. We had attempted to do a similar thing last year, just centered around the Colorado River Basin, which was a whole lot of the rest of the country couldn't see the value of that. But the Western rivers, when you look at the Rio Grande, the Colorado, the rivers feeding into the Great Salt Lake, the Klamath River, on and on and on, there are lots, the Arkansas and the South Platte also being a common issue all across everything west of the 100th meridian, which has now shifted. The rain level has shifted to the 98th meridian. Now it's moving east, where it's no longer the 100th meridian, where it starts getting dry as you go west. So that to me is really good. We got it in the policy. It wasn't perfect, but it's something that can be modified in future years. And
Great.
Put the stake in the ground. Good job.
yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
One last thing, we all still have an outstanding alternate opening on APSHA. And Rachel, I'm out of this conversation. And one of the ideas that had come up for us was to revisit the applicants reinvite the applicants who had applied when we initially went to a joint formulated board, because we had quite a few at that time that expressed interest that we ultimately didn't appoint, because we chose to appoint the people who were on the board. So I just wanted to check in with you all about, you know, if there's interest in doing that, to direct our staffs to kind of figure out a way to reach out to them and ask if they are interested in this alternate seat. And we could either revisit those applications or ask them to reapply.
I think it might be a good list to look through, you know, and see if there's people to at least say, hey, put your name in again.
Some people that have a good base knowledge of housing that
Yeah.
we might want to
Yeah.
invite into applying.
I was going to say, there were different levels when you talk about a 25-member pool or whatever it was to begin with. But I think to review it and potentially call a few people and say, by the way, did you see we're advertising again? Would you like to reapply? The challenge with that is always if someone reapplies or comes back in and then they don't get